I was standing on the cold, unforgiving pavement of Fifth Avenue, shivering in my cheap Zara sweater, fighting back tears of absolute humiliation. Just moments ago, the owner of New York's most exclusive bridal boutique had security literally escort me out laughing that my kind belonged at a thrift store not touching her $80,000 silk gowns. My supposed best friend was still inside sipping complimentary champagne with the very women who mocked me. I called my sweet, modest fiancé, telling him my dream was ruined. I expected him to arrive in his beat-up Honda. Instead, the ground began to shake. My name is Chloe Jenkins. For the last 6 years, my entire world revolved around the chaotic, heartbreaking, and beautiful pediatric oncology ward at Mount Sinai Hospital. I was a nurse. My life was defined by 12-hour shifts, scrub tops stained with coffee, and a bank account that barely covered my half of the rent in a tiny, drafty apartment in Queens. I didn't care about luxury. I didn't care about status. I cared about my patients, and I cared about Christian. Christian Vance was, to my knowledge, the most wonderfully boring man on the planet. We met on a rainy Tuesday at a rundown Brooklyn diner. I had just lost a patient. I was sitting in a booth quietly sobbing into a lukewarm cup of black coffee. Christian, sitting 2 tables away, had walked over, placed a pristine white handkerchief on my table, and said in a soft, soothing British accent, "Whatever the storm is, it eventually runs out of rain." He told me he was a junior researcher for an agricultural firm. He dressed in sensible, slightly faded corduroy trousers, wore a battered Casio watch, and drove a 2014 Honda Accord that rattled when it hit 50 miles per hour. He was gentle, fiercely intelligent, and entirely unimpressive on paper. When people asked what his family did back in England, he would casually wave a hand and say, "Oh, a bit of farming in the countryside, sheep mostly." I fell madly in love with him. He was my rock, my sanctuary, away from the sterile, beeping monitors of the hospital. After 2 years of quiet, blissful dating, Christian proposed. We were sitting on a picnic blanket in Central Park eating cheap hot dogs. He pulled out a small, worn velvet box and presented me with a ring. It wasn't a massive diamond. It was a deep, mesmerizing blue sapphire surrounded by tiny, antique-looking stones. "It belonged to my grandmother," he said, his eyes shining with a strange, intense vulnerability. "She was a rather formidable woman, but she would have loved your heart, Chloe. Will you marry me?" I said yes before he even finished the sentence. The trouble started with my maid of honor, Jessica Carter. Jessica and I had been friends since middle school, but our paths had diverged sharply. While I went into nursing, Jessica married a hedge fund manager and practically made a career out of climbing Manhattan's brutal social ladder. When she saw my ring, she squinted at it. A sapphire." "Well, it's quaint Chloe. Very Princess Diana on a budget," Jessica had said, swirling her mimosa. "But if you're marrying a guy who counts pennies, we are going to compensate with the dress. I'm pulling a major favor. I got us an appointment at Maison de Geneviève." My stomach dropped. Maison de Geneviève wasn't just a bridal shop. It was an institution. It was where billionaires, A-list actresses, and European aristocrats flew in to buy custom gowns. Jess, I can't afford a pair of socks from that place. My budget is $3,000, maximum." Jessica rolled her eyes, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Let me worry about that. They have a sample sale in the back for people not on the Forbes list. It's an experience, Chloe. You deserve to feel like royalty for one day, even if you're just marrying a guy who studies dirt for a living." I should have said no. I should have trusted my gut, which was screaming that this was a terrible idea. But the exhaustion of the hospital had worn me down, and a tiny, foolish part of me wanted just for an afternoon to feel like a princess. I agreed. It would be the biggest mistake of my life, and the catalyst that would unravel every single thing I thought I knew about the man I was going to marry. Stepping into Maison de Geneviève was like crossing the threshold into a different dimension. The air literally smelled like money, a custom blend of white lilies, cold marble, and expensive French perfume. There were no racks of dresses here. Instead, silk-clad mannequins stood isolated in spotlit alcoves looking like museum exhibits. The moment we walked in, I felt the immediate crushing weight of my own inadequacy. I was wearing my best outfit, a modest navy dress from Macy's, and a pair of sensible flats. Beside me, Jessica was draped in Chanel, looking entirely in her element. We were intercepted by the owner herself, Geneviève Dubois. Geneviève was a tall, severe woman with razor-sharp cheekbones, platinum hair pulled into a tight chignon, and a gaze that could freeze boiling water. She looked Jessica up and down, offering a crisp, professional nod of approval before her icy gray eyes slid over to me. I physically felt my worth being calculated and dismissed in the span of 3 seconds. "Mrs. Carter." Geneviève said to Jessica, her voice a purr of polished condescension. "Welcome back. And this must be the, bride." "Yes, this is Chloe," Jessica chirped, completely oblivious to the venom in the room. "We have an appointment. We're looking for something ethereal, classic, but unforgettable." Geneviève gestured for a young, terrified-looking assistant named Clara to bring us to a viewing suite. The suite was larger than my entire apartment, lined with velvet sofas and antique gold mirrors. "Before we begin pulling pieces," Geneviève said, clasping her hands together, the massive diamond on her finger catching the light, "let us discuss the financial parameters. Custom pieces begin at $40,000. Our ready-to-wear assuming alterations typically settles around 15 to 20. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dessert dry. "Actually," I mumbled, my face flushing scarlet, "I was hoping to look at the sample pieces. My budget is closer to 3,000. The silence in the room was absolute. Clara, the assistant, flinched. Jessica coughed awkwardly, suddenly studying the ceiling. Genevieve's perfectly sculpted eyebrows twitched. A slow, highly amused, and utterly cruel smile spread across her red lips. $3,000. She repeated, enunciating every syllable as if the words were foul-tasting. My dear, $3,000 might purchase the veil for one of our lesser gowns. It certainly does not purchase an hour of my time. Genevieve, please. Jessica interjected, suddenly playing the benevolent savior. I told her about the back room, the discontinued lines. Just let her try a few on, for the photos. Genevieve sighed, a dramatic exhalation of long-suffering patience. Very well. Clara, take Miss Jenkins to the archive closet. Bring her the synthetic blends from 3 seasons ago. Do not let her touch the current silk organza with bare hands. I was mortified, but the humiliation paralyzed me. I meekly followed Clara down a long, dimly lit hallway to a cramped back room filled with plastic-wrapped dresses. As I sifted through the heavy yellowing gowns, my eye caught something catching the light from a slightly ajar door leading to a private fitting room. I stepped toward it. Hanging on a velvet mannequin was a masterpiece. It was a sheath of pristine, shimmering ivory silk, overlaid with hand-embroidered silver threading that looked like frost on a window pane. It was breathtaking. It was the dress I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. Without thinking, captivated by its beauty, I reached out and gently brushed my fingers against the tulle sleeve. What do you think you are doing? The voice cracked like a whip behind me. I spun around to find Genevieve standing in the doorway, her face pale with fury. I stammered, pulling my hand back as if I had touched a hot stove. It's beautiful. I just wanted to see. That is the Chantilly imported from Paris this morning. Genevieve hissed, striding forward and violently pulling the dress out of my reach. It is an $85,000 piece of art. Your hands are entirely unsuited to be touching it. In fact, your presence in this establishment is beginning to tarnish the air. Hey, I said, a spark of defensive anger finally breaking through the embarrassment. There's no need to speak to me like that. I was just admiring it. Genevieve scoffed, stepping into my personal space. She looked down her nose at me, her eyes locked onto my engagement ring. I know your type, she sneered softly. You trap some poor middle-class boy, demand a fairy tale you cannot afford, and come into places like this to play pretend. Look at that tragic little stone on your finger. It's cloudy. It's cheap. Just like you. Before I could formulate a response to Genevieve's vile insult, the doors to the private suite swung open. A woman walked in preceded by two burly men in dark suits carrying shopping bags. It was Cassandra Belmont. Even I, someone who never read tabloids, knew who she was. She was the daughter of a real estate tycoon notorious for her reality TV tantrums, her endless stream of high-profile divorces, and her vicious, arrogant demeanor. Genevieve Darling. Cassandra drawled, tossing her sunglasses onto a glass table without looking to see if they landed. I'm bored, and I need a reception dress for the Monaco Gala. Something silver, something no one else can have. Genevieve's entire demeanor shifted. The cruel Ice Queen instantly melted into a fawning, desperate sycophant. Cassandra, what a magnificent surprise. Of course, my dear, of course. In fact, Genevieve's eyes darted to the Chantilly dress she had just yanked away from me. I have the very piece, just arrived, exquisite silver embroidery. Cassandra walked over, not even acknowledging my existence, and looked at the dress. It's acceptable, she declared. Wrap it. Excuse me? I said, my voice trembling, but loud enough to stop the room. I was actually looking at that. Cassandra finally turned her head, looking at me as if I were a cockroach that had scurried across her Italian leather boots. She looked from my sensible shoes to my flush, tear-stained face. Then she looked at Genevieve. Genevieve, Cassandra said coldly. Why is the help speaking to me, and why is she in the VIP wing? She's leaving Miss Belmont. Genevieve said quickly, panic flashing in her eyes at the thought of offending her billionaire client. She turned to me, all traces of professional courtesy gone. Get out. My friend has an appointment here. I protested, my vision blurring with tears. I looked toward the hallway, hoping Jessica would appear and defend me. But through the glass double doors of the main lounge, I saw Jessica sitting on a velvet couch, sipping champagne and actively looking away, pretending she didn't hear the commotion. My heart shattered. Security! Genevieve snapped. A massive man in a black suit materialized from the corridor. This woman is trespassing and attempting to damage our couture. Genevieve lied flawlessly. Escort her off the premises, immediately. The security guard grabbed my upper arm. His grip was painfully tight, his fingers digging into my muscle. Let go of me. I cried out, struggling, but he was too strong. He practically dragged me down the hallway, through the opulent main lobby, past the staring eyes of wealthy patrons, and past Jessica, who took a sudden intense interest in her phone. He shoved me out the heavy glass doors. I stumbled, hitting the hard concrete of the Fifth Avenue sidewalk, scraping my knees. Don't come back! The guard grunted, turning his back and locking the door from the inside. I sat on the cold pavement, the roar of New York City traffic rushing past me. Pedestrians stepped around me, casting pitying or annoyed glances. I pulled my knees to my chest and broke down. I sobbed heavy, ugly, gasping sobs. I felt entirely worthless, small, and utterly alone. With shaking hands, I pulled my phone from my purse and hit the speed dial for Christian. It rang twice before he answered. Hello, my love. His warm, steady voice came through the speaker. How is the dress shopping? Did you find something beautiful? The sound of his voice broke the last dam of my composure. Christian. I choked out a ragged sob tearing through my throat. Christian, it's awful. They kicked me out. They threw me onto the street. The owner said our ring was cheap, that I was cheap. Even Jessica abandoned me. I'm just sitting on the sidewalk crying like an idiot. There was a silence on the line. It wasn't a normal silence. It was a heavy, suffocating, terrifying vacuum of sound. When Christian finally spoke, the warmth was completely gone. The gentle, stuttering agricultural researcher vanished. The voice that came through the phone was chillingly calm, low, and vibrated with an authority that sent a shiver down my spine. "Who touched you?" he asked. "What?" I sniffled, confused by the sudden change in his tone. "Chloe, did someone physically put their hands on you?" The crispness of his British accent was suddenly razor sharp, devoid of any of its usual casual softness. "The security guard," I whispered. "He grabbed my arm. It hurts." "I see." The ice in his voice could have frozen the Hudson River. "Where are you exactly?" "Outside Maison de Geneviève, on Fifth Avenue." "Stand up, Chloe," Christian commanded. It wasn't a request. "Do not cry for these people. Do not shed another tear. Stay exactly where you are. I am coming." "Christian, your car is in the shop. How are you?" "I am coming," he repeated, cutting me off. "And Chloe, the ring on your finger belonged to the Duchess of Marlborough. It is insured for £4 million. Do not let anyone tell you what you are worth ever again." He hung up. I stared at my phone, my mind spinning, my breath catching in my throat. Duchess of Marlborough. £4 million. What was he talking about? I barely had time to process his words. 10 minutes later, the ambient noise of the city, the taxis, the chatter of the sirens was suddenly drowned out by a deep, synchronized, mechanical roar. People on the street stopped. I stood up, wiping my eyes, and looked down the avenue. Coming down the center of Fifth Avenue, aggressively blocking out the regular yellow cabs, was a convoy. 10 massive, heavily armored midnight black Range Rover Sentinels were moving in a perfect tactical formation. They didn't stop for the lights. They didn't yield. The motorcade swerved violently toward the curb tires, screeching as they completely blocked the entrance to Maison de Geneviève. Before the vehicles had even fully stopped, the doors of the SUVs flew open in unison. Out stepped 24 men in immaculate dark suits. Earpieces curled tightly around their ears. They moved with terrifying military precision, instantly securing the perimeter of the sidewalk and physically pushing back the gathering crowd of onlookers. Then the door to the lead SUV opened, and out stepped Christian. But it wasn't the Christian I knew. Gone was the faded corduroy and the gentle slouch. He was wearing a bespoke midnight blue Savile Row suit that fit him like armor. His posture was rigid, commanding, and radiating an overwhelming aura of absolute power. He locked eyes with me, his expression softening for a fraction of a second as he saw my scraped knees before hardening into a look of pure, unadulterated vengeance as he turned his gaze toward the glass doors of the bridal shop. The heavy brass-handled glass doors of Maison de Geneviève were locked from the inside. The massive security guard who had violently dragged me onto the street stood behind the glass, his arms crossed over his chest, a smug grin plastered across his face. That grin vanished the moment Christian's tactical team formed a perimeter around the entrance. Christian didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked toward the boutique with the slow, measured stride of an apex predator that already knows the prey is trapped. He stopped inches from the glass. He locked eyes with the guard. The sheer radiating menace in Christian's gaze made the man physically take a step back. Christian didn't even raise his hand to the door. He simply tilted his head a fraction of an inch to the left. Instantly, a towering man from his security detail, a man whose suit strained over his shoulders with a small silver pin shaped like a griffin on his lapel, stepped forward. He pulled a heavy metallic device from his jacket, clamped it over the boutique's electronic magnetic lock system, and pressed a button. There was a sharp electrical crackle, the smell of ozone, and the high-tech $10,000 security system fried instantly. The heavy glass doors swung open with a soft hiss. Christian stepped over the threshold and his security detail flooded in behind him, instantly securing the lobby. 2 men stood by the exits, arms folded. 3 more fanned out their eyes, scanning the opulent room, dismissing the silk mannequins and locking onto the people. I walked in behind Christian, flanked by 2 guards who treated me like I was made of spun glass, completely shielding me from the outside world. The atmosphere inside the boutique had undergone a violent shift. The smug champagne-soaked giggles had evaporated, replaced by a suffocating, terrified silence. Genevieve Dubois was standing near the velvet sofas, her face chalk white. She had likely dealt with wealthy men before Wall Street bankers, tech CEOs, Russian oligarchs, but what was standing in her lobby wasn't just wealth. It was old money. It was sovereign power. And it was furious. Christian stood in the center of the showroom. The overhead spotlights caught the fabric of his suit. It wasn't just midnight blue. It was a bespoke vicuña wool that probably cost more than the average American home. The battered Casio watch he usually wore was gone, replaced by a platinum Patek Philippe Grand complication that gleamed coldly on his wrist. Who is in charge of this establishment? Christian's voice was low, smooth, and laced with an icy British aristocratic drawl that cut through the silence like a scalpel. Genevieve stepped forward, her heels clicking nervously on the marble. She tried to summon her signature haughty demeanor, but her hands were trembling. I am Genevieve Dubois. This is a private boutique. You cannot simply force your way in here. I will call the police. Fine, call them, Christian replied instantly, his face a mask of terrifying calm. Tell the NYPD commissioner, who incidentally plays golf with my uncle at Shinnecock Hills every Sunday, that Christian Vance is currently trespassing. I'm sure he will be fascinated to hear why. Genevieve's breath hitched. The name Vance seemed to physically strike her. The color drained entirely from her lips. Before Genevieve could formulate an apology, Jessica burst out from the VIP wing. She had a half-empty flute of champagne in her hand and a panicked, desperate smile on her face. She took one look at the tactical team, the armored SUVs outside, and the staggering transformation of my supposedly boring fiancé, and her opportunistic brain went into overdrive. Christian... Jessica cried out, practically shoving past Genevieve to get to us. She reached out to grab my arm, her eyes wide with fake relief. Oh my God, Chloe. I was just coming out to look for you. I was screaming at Genevieve, telling her she made a massive mistake. Christian, thank God you're here. These people are monsters. Christian didn't look at her. He didn't even turn his head. He simply raised one perfectly tailored arm and pointed an index finger at her. Do not speak, oh, Christian commanded. The absolute authority in his voice made Jessica snap her mouth shut so fast her teeth clicked. Christian finally turned his gaze to my former best friend. You allowed my fiancée to be humiliated. You sat on that sofa drinking cheap vintage while she was physically thrown onto the pavement. Your proximity to Chloe is permanently revoked. If you attempt to contact her, text her, or even look in her general direction again, I will have my legal team dismantle your husband's pathetic little hedge fund by Tuesday morning. Now remove yourself from my sight. Jessica stood paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. She dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor. Sobbing, she turned and sprinted out the door, abandoning her Chanel purse on the sofa. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of profound grief and total vindication. Christian's attention returned to Genevieve. He stepped closer to her. Where is the man who laid his hands on my future wife? Genevieve couldn't speak. She was shaking visibly. She slowly lifted a trembling finger and pointed toward the back corridor. The security guard who had thrown me out was trying to discreetly back away toward the fire exit. Hayes, Christian said quietly. The towering security chief moved with terrifying speed. In 3 strides, he crossed the showroom, grabbed the guard by the collar of his uniform, and effortlessly hurled him back into the center of the room. The large man crashed onto the marble floor, sliding until he stopped at Christian's custom-made Tom Ford Oxfords. You, Christian said, looking down at the man as if he were inspecting a diseased rat. You grabbed her right arm. Is that correct? I was just following orders, sir. The guard stammered, holding his hands up defensively. The owner told me she was trespassing. I did not ask for your rationalization. Christian said, his voice dropping an octave. I asked if you used your right hand to bruise the woman I love. The man swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, yes, sir. Christian stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. Consider yourself extraordinarily fortunate that I'm a civilized man, he whispered, because every instinct in my body is telling me to have Hayes break every finger on that hand. You are fired. If you ever work in security in this city again, I will know. Leave. The guard scrambled to his feet, didn't look back, and sprinted out the shattered front doors. Christian turned his attention fully to Geneviève Dubois. The reckoning had arrived. Now, Madame Dubois. Christian began buttoning the center button of his jacket. Let us discuss the concept of value. You told my fiancée that her ring was cheap. You told her that she was cheap. Mr. Vance, please. Geneviève begged, her voice cracking. The haughty aristocrat of bridal couture was completely undone. It was a terrible misunderstanding. I did not realize who she was. I swear to you, if I had known she was with the Vance family. Aha! That is exactly the point. Christian interrupted, his voice echoing off the high gold-leafed ceilings. You should not have to know she is marrying into a dynasty to treat her with basic human dignity. She is a pediatric oncology nurse. She spends 12 hours a day fighting for the lives of dying children, earning a fraction of what you charge for a yard of synthetic lace. Her worth is astronomical. Yours, Madame Dubois, is entirely fabricated. Excuse me. The sharp, incredibly annoyed voice came from the archway of the VIP suite. Cassandra Belmont stepped into the main showroom, clutching the silver-embroidered Chantilly dress against her chest. She looked infuriated by the interruption to her shopping experience. I don't know who you think you are, Cassandra sneered, tossing her hair over her shoulder. But you are ruining my fitting. My father is Richard Belmont. We practically own this city. So take your little rent-a-cops and get out of my way. The room collectively held its breath. I braced myself. Christian slowly turned his head. A dark, terrifyingly amused smile played at the corners of his mouth. Ah, Cassandra Belmont, Christian said smoothly. I recognize you from the tabloids, and I am intimately familiar with your father, Richard. Cassandra smirked, assuming she had won. Then you know you need to leave. Or Richard Belmont. Christian continued, ignoring her entirely, his voice rising in volume so the entire boutique could hear. The man who leveraged his entire Manhattan commercial real estate portfolio to secure a $300 million bridging loan from Vance Holdings, a loan that, as of 9 a.m. this morning, is in technical default. Cassandra's smirk vanished. You're lying. I never lie about money, Miss Belmont, Christian said coldly. Your family's empire is built on a mountain of our debt. My father has been debating whether to grant your father an extension or simply seize his assets. Given your breathtaking lack of manners, I think I will text him right now and suggest the latter. You might want to put the dress down, Cassandra. By tomorrow, your credit cards will be declining. Cassandra dropped the $85,000 Chantilly dress onto the floor as if it had caught fire. She stared at Christian in sheer, unadulterated horror, then turned and fled back into the dressing room to frantically find her phone. Christian looked back at Geneviève. He pulled a sleek obsidian black smartphone from his pocket. He dialed a single number and put it on speakerphone. It rang once. Vance! A crisp professional voice answered immediately. David, Christian said, get me the CEO of Vornado Realty Trust on the line, now. There was a pause of perhaps 10 seconds. Then a new, slightly breathless voice came on the line. Christian, it's Michael. Good to hear from you. To what do I owe the pleasure? Geneviève let out a small, strangled gasp. Everyone in Manhattan high society knew Michael Fascitelli's voice. He was one of the largest commercial landlords in the world. Michael Sassos, Christian said casually, walking over to the nearest display mannequin and running his fingers critically over the silk. You own the retail property at 714 Fifth Avenue, correct? Yes, we do. It's currently leased to a bridal boutique, Maison de Geneviève. Not anymore, Christian said. I want to purchase the commercial lease, outright. Whatever the penalty clause is for breaking her contract, double it and bill it to my private accounts. Genevieve dropped to her knees. Literally. She collapsed onto the marble floor, her hands covering her mouth, sobbing hysterically. No, please, I beg you, this is my life's work. You can't do this. Consider it done, Christian, the voice on the phone said smoothly. I'll have my legal team draft the termination notice. It will be legally binding in 15 minutes. Thank you, Michael. Have a good afternoon. Christian hung up the phone and slipped it back into his pocket. He looked down at Genevieve Dubois, who was weeping in a crumpled heap of designer clothing. You have exactly 30 minutes to vacate my property, Christian told her, his voice devoid of any emotion. You may take your personal effects. The inventory now belongs to me. He then looked past the weeping owner, his eyes scanning the terrified staff who were huddled in the corner. His gaze landed on Clara, the young assistant who had flinched when Genevieve insulted my budget. Clara looked like she was about to faint. Christian walked over to her. The massive security team parted to let him through. What is your name? Christian asked gently, the ice finally melting from his tone. Clara, sir, she whispered, shaking. Clara, Christian said. Did you agree with how Madame Dubois treated my fiancé? No, sir. Clara said, tears spilling over her cheeks. I thought it was cruel, but I need this job to pay for nursing school. Christian paused. The mention of nursing school made him glance back at me with a soft, incredibly proud smile. He looked back at Clara. You no longer work for Maison de Geneviève, Christian told her, because it no longer exists. However, I am opening a charitable foundation focused on pediatric care next month in London. I need a director of operations who understands the nursing field. Your starting salary will be triple whatever you were making here, and we will cover your tuition. He pulled a sleek black card from his inner pocket and handed it to the stunned girl. Call that number tomorrow morning. Clara took the card with trembling hands, staring at Christian as if he were an angel that had just fallen through the ceiling. Christian finally turned around and walked back to me. The terrifying, ruthless billionaire vanished, and the man I loved, the gentle, protective man who had handed me a handkerchief in a diner, was back. He reached out and gently cupped my cheek, his thumb brushing away the dried tears under my eyes. I am so sorry I was late, my love, he whispered softly, oblivious to the destruction he had just rained down around us. Christian. I breathed, my head spinning, looking from his Patek Philippe to the tactical team to the weeping boutique owner on the floor. Who are you? He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. I am the man who loves you, and I am the heir to the Vance estate. I am so sorry I hid it from you, Chloe. I needed to know that you loved me for the sheep and the corduroy and the terrible Honda. I needed to know you loved me. He looked down at my hand at the sapphire ring that had started this entire nightmare. And for the record, he said softly, his eyes shining, that ring is flawless, just like you. Now let's get out of this dreadful place. We have a flight to catch. A flight? I asked, completely bewildered. To where? To Paris. Christian said, taking my hand and lacing his fingers through mine. I hear they have much better dresses and a significantly better class of people. He led me out of the ruined boutique, past the shattered glass doors, and into the waiting armored SUV. As the motorcade pulled away from the curb, leaving Fifth Avenue in stunned, absolute silence, I leaned my head against his shoulder. My ordinary, boring life was over. The fairy tale had begun, but it wasn't one of glass slippers and pumpkins. It was a fairy tale of 10 armored SUVs, ruthless devotion, and a man who would literally buy a building just to wipe a tear from my eye. The transition from a freezing New York sidewalk to the private tarmac at Teterboro Airport took less than 45 minutes, but it felt like I had been launched into an entirely different solar system. Christian's motorcade bypassed the commercial terminals entirely, gliding through a heavily guarded security gate and pulling right up to the steps of a massive gleaming Bombardier Global 7500. The tail of the aircraft bore no flashy logos, only a subtle dark silver crest, a griffin, the same one I had seen pinned to the lapel of Hayes Christian's terrifyingly efficient head of security. As we boarded the jet, my sensible flat sank into carpet that felt thicker than my mattress at home. The interior was a masterclass in understated, staggering wealth: polished walnut paneling, creamy leather captain's chairs, a full dining room, and a private bedroom suite in the aft cabin. A flight attendant named Sarah, radiating professional warmth, immediately handed me a crystal tumbler of sparkling water and a warm lavender-scented towel for my scraped knees. Christian sat across from me, shedding his bespoke suit jacket. He looked exhausted, rubbing the bridge of his nose before looking at me with eyes full of apprehension. "I suppose I owe you the mother of all explanations," he said quietly, the hum of the jet engines vibrating beneath us as we taxied down the runway. I took a deep breath, clutching the crystal tumbler like a lifeline. "You said you did agricultural research. You told me you were a farmer Christian. You drove a Honda that smelled like old French fries." A small, sheepish smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Technically, Chloe, I didn't lie. Vance Holdings does own agricultural land. We control roughly 40% of the commercial wool export out of Scotland, along with vast tracts of sustainable farming initiatives globally. I do research for them. I just happen to own the conglomerate that employs me. And as for the Honda, I bought it off Craigslist my first week in New York. I wanted to blend in." "Blend in." I echoed, my voice rising slightly. "Christian, you just bought a commercial skyscraper on Fifth Avenue over speakerphone to spite a bridal shop owner. That is not blending in. That is supervillain territory." Christian leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his expression turning entirely serious. "My life from the day I was born has been a meticulously managed asset. The Vance name carries a weight that crushes people, Chloe. Growing up, I watched my father's friends marry for mergers. I watched my cousins date women who only looked at their trust funds, calculating their net worth over dinner. Every conversation was a transaction. Every relationship was a strategic alliance." He reached across the aisle and took my hand, his thumb tracing the sapphire ring. "When I moved to New York to oversee our American acquisitions, I wanted to disappear. I wanted to know what it felt like to just be a man. And then I saw you crying in that diner. I watched you treat a homeless man outside the hospital with more dignity than my family's associates treat heads of state. You loved me when I was just a boring man in corduroy pants. You loved me when I had nothing to offer you but myself. I needed that, Chloe. I needed to know it was real. Can you forgive me?" Looking into his eyes, I saw the same gentle, devoted man I had fallen in love with. The money was a shock, yes, but the heart beating beneath the Savile Row suit was the same one that held me when I lost a patient. "I forgive you," I whispered. "But if you ever let me eat a gas station hot dog while you secretly have a private chef, I will end our engagement." Christian laughed, a bright, relieved sound that filled the cabin. Deal. 7 hours later, we touched down in Paris. We were whisked away not to a hotel, but to the Château de la Vierge, an awe-inspiring 17th-century estate owned by the Vance family, situated just 30 minutes outside the city limits. The grounds were a labyrinth of manicured topiaries, stone fountains, and sprawling vineyards. The next morning, I learned exactly what Christian meant when he said Paris had a better class of people. We didn't go to a store. The store came to us. I was sitting in the sun-drenched morning room of the chateau, drinking coffee from a Limoges porcelain cup, when a small, fiercely energetic woman with cropped silver hair and thick black-rimmed glasses marched through the double doors. She was followed by 3 assistants carrying massive garment bags. This was Madame Vivienne. Even in my fashion-ignorant world, I knew her name. She was an haute couture legend, a woman who famously refused to design for royalty if she found their personalities uninspiring. So, Vivienne declared in a thick, gravelly French accent, dropping a leather sketchbook onto the mahogany table. "This is the girl who caused Christian to destroy the miserable Geneviève Dubois. Let me look at you." She walked around me in a slow circle, squinting, nodding to herself. "Geneviève is a hack," Vivienne announced loudly to the room. "She designs for women who want to look expensive. I design for women who want to look immortal. Christian tells me you heal children. You fight the darkness." "I'm a nurse, yes," I said, entirely intimidated. Vivienne clapped her hands together. "Perfect. No heavy beading, no gaudy crystals. We will use lion silk light as a ghost with hand-spun Calais lace that mimics the frost on a winter morning. You will not wear the dress, Chloe. The dress will worship you." For 3 hours, her team draped, pinned, and sketched. It was a chaotic, beautiful flurry of creation. I felt an overwhelming sense of joy bubbling up inside me. The nightmare of Fifth Avenue was fading, replaced by this surreal, wonderful dream. But just as Vivienne was pinning the final layer of tulle against my shoulder, the heavy oak doors of the morning room swung open with a resounding, violent crash. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet 10 degrees. Standing in the doorway was a woman who looked like an older, terrifyingly sharp version of Christian. She wore a tailored crimson skirt suit, her posture as rigid as a steel beam. Her silver hair was swept up into an immaculate twist, and her eyes, a chilling, piercing blue, locked onto me with the warmth of a firing squad. "Christian," the woman said, her voice dripping with aristocratic ice, "you have been a very busy boy, and I see you have brought your little stray dog into my house." Christian stepped in front of me, his body shielding mine. "Mother, what a deeply unpleasant surprise." Lady Beatrice Vance did not walk. She glided. She moved into the room with an air of absolute ownership, dismissing Vivienne and her assistants with a single sharp flick of her wrist. Vivienne, muttering colorful French curses under her breath, grabbed her sketchbook and quickly ushered her team out of the room, leaving Christian, his mother, and me alone in the sprawling, echoing space. "Fouar, I leave you unsupervised in America for 2 years." Beatrice began, her heels clicking rhythmically against the parquet floor. "And you shatter generations of discretion. I woke up this morning to a frantic phone call from Michael Fascitelli informing me that my son is buying up Manhattan commercial real estate on a whim to settle a domestic squabble. Care to explain Isserad?" "There's nothing to explain, Mother." Christian said, his voice dropping into that low, dangerous register he had used with the security guard. "A woman insulted my fiancé. I removed the woman. It was a simple transaction." Beatrice finally stopped pacing and turned her full, devastating attention to me. She looked at the half-pinned silk draped over my shoulders, her lip curling in distaste. "Fiancé?" She scoffed softly. "Yes, the American nurse. I had my team run a background check on you while I was crossing the Atlantic, Miss Jenkins. Your father is a retired postal worker. Your mother is a public school teacher. You have $94,000 in student loan debt, and you live in an apartment that is roughly the size of my primary walk-in closet." "All of which is completely irrelevant," Christian snapped, taking a step toward her. Christian, stop," I said quietly, placing a hand on his arm. I was trembling, but not from fear. I was angry. In the pediatric ward, I dealt with demanding, arrogant, and terrifying people every single day. I had looked death in the face and fought it for 12 hours straight. A wealthy woman in a red suit was not going to break me. I stepped out from behind Christian, standing tall, despite the pins sticking out of my unfinished dress. I met Lady Beatrice's icy gaze directly. "It's nice to meet you, Lady Vance," I said evenly. Your researchers are very thorough. They got everything right except my debt is actually 92,000. I made a payment last week. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to people speaking back to her, especially not with calm, polite defiance. She reached into her Hermes handbag, pulled out a pristine cream-colored envelope, and dropped it onto the mahogany table. "Let us save ourselves a great deal of tedious drama, Miss Jenkins," Beatrice said smoothly. "You have stumbled into a world you cannot possibly comprehend, let alone survive. The Vance family does not marry for love. We marry for legacy. You are a biological anomaly, a fleeting infatuation of my son's rebellion. In that envelope is a cashier's check drawn on a Swiss account. It is for $20 million, tax-free." Christian let out a sound of pure disgust. "Mother, are you insane? Why?" Silence. "Christian." Beatrice commanded, never taking her eyes off me. "Take the money, Miss Jenkins. Pay off your little loans. Buy a nice house in the suburbs. Continue playing Florence Nightingale. All you have to do is walk out of this chateau, leave my son alone, and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement." I looked at the envelope. $20 million. It was a number so large it didn't even feel real. It was enough to build a new pediatric wing at Mount Sinai. It was enough to never work another day in my life. I slowly walked over to the table. I picked up the envelope. Beatrice smiled a cold, victorious smirk. "A wise decision. We all have our price." "We do," I agreed softly. I didn't open the envelope. Instead, I gripped it in both hands and tore it directly down the middle. Beatrice's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of profound, genuine shock. Christian let out a sharp breath, a grin slowly spreading across his face. I tore the envelope again, letting the 4 torn pieces of the $20 million check flutter onto the mahogany table like snow. "You think you're intimidating, Lady Vance?" I asked, my voice calm, but laced with absolute conviction. I spend my days holding the hands of parents as they watch their children slip away. I have seen the absolute worst, most agonizing pain the universe has to offer. I see human beings stripped down to their fragile, terrified cores. You're just a woman who happens to have a lot of money. You don't scare me, and you certainly don't own your son. I stepped closer to her, closing the distance until we were mere feet apart. "I love Christian." I continued, my voice unwavering. "I loved him when I thought he was a broke researcher, and I love him now. I don't want your money. I don't want your legacy. If Christian decided to walk away from all of this tomorrow and move back to Queens with me, I would be thrilled. So keep your checks. You're going to have to try a lot harder to get rid of me." For a long, agonizing moment, the room was dead silent. Beatrice stared at me, her blue eyes wide, searching my face for any sign of a bluff, any crack in my armor. She found none. Slowly, incredibly, her rigid posture relaxed just a fraction of an inch. The pure hostility in her gaze shifted into something entirely unexpected, a very cautious, grudging respect. "Well?" Beatrice murmured softly, almost to herself. "She certainly isn't boring." Before Beatrice could say another word, the heavy doors burst open again. This time it was Hayes, the head of security. He moved with an urgency I hadn't seen before, his face grim. "Sir, Madame," Hayes said, addressing Christian and Beatrice simultaneously. "We have a massive situation. We need to lock down the estate." "What is it, Hayes? Wait," Christian demanded, instantly shifting into crisis mode. "It's Cassandra Belmont, sir," Hayes reported, holding out a tablet. She couldn't afford to pay back the loan, but she realized she possessed a different kind of leverage. Information. Hayes tapped the screen and handed it to Christian. I moved to Christian's side to look. It was the homepage of the Daily Mail, but similar alerts were popping up from page 6 TMZ and the New York Post. The massive, bold headline read, "Billionaire heir's secret double life. The scheming nurse who trapped the Vance prince and destroyed a Fifth Avenue empire. Below the headline was a blurry, zoomed-in photo of me sitting on the sidewalk outside Maison de Geneviève crying, looking pathetic and unhinged. Next to it was a highly edited photo of Christian shouting at Geneviève Dubois. Cassandra went to the press, Hayes explained grimly. She spun the entire narrative. She's claiming Miss Jenkins is a professional con artist who targeted Christian, staged a hysterical meltdown at the boutique to manipulate him and forced him to bankrupt a beloved local business. They are painting Miss Jenkins as a gold-digging master manipulator. And worse. Hayes hesitated, glancing at me with genuine sympathy. Worse what? I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Cassandra's people found Jessica Carter, your former friend. Jessica is doing exclusive paid television interviews right now. She's claiming she tried to warn Christian about you. The paparazzi have already found out you're in Paris. There are over 50 press vans currently swarming the outer gates of the chateau. The room spun. My nursing license, my reputation, my entire life, everything was being burned to the ground on a global stage by a vindictive socialite and a jealous ex-best friend. Christian's eyes turned pitch black. The aura of the ruthless billionaire returned tenfold. He handed the tablet back to Hayes. Hayes. Christian said, his voice devoid of all humanity. Call David. Tell him to execute the hostile takeover of Vornado Realty. Liquidate Richard Belmont's assets. I want Cassandra's family penniless by sunset. No, I shouted, grabbing Christian's arm. Christian looked down at me confused. Chloe, they are destroying your name. I will not allow it. If you crush them with money, you prove them right. I argued, my mind racing. They are trying to paint you as a tyrant under the spell of a villain. Bankrupting a family validates their story. The press will eat it up. You'll ruin yourself trying to avenge me. She is entirely correct, Lady Beatrice interjected, stepping forward. The coldness was gone, replaced by the sharp, tactical mind that had run the Vance empire for decades. She looked at me, a dangerous glint in her eye. Miss Jenkins has successfully identified the trap. A brute force financial attack is exactly what the Belmonts want. It forces us into a legal battle while they play the victims. Christian gritted his teeth. Then what do you suggest, Mother? We sit here while they drag Chloe through the mud. Beatrice smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant smile. She walked over to the table and picked up the torn pieces of the $20 million check. We don't hide, Christian, Beatrice said. We control the narrative. Cassandra Belmont wants a media circus, fine. We will give her the greatest spectacle this decade has ever seen. But Miss Jenkins... Beatrice turned to me, her eyes locking onto mine with the intensity of a general preparing for war. If you are going to be a Vance, you cannot just be brave in a hospital. You must be brave in the fire. Are you prepared to face the entire world? I looked at the tablet in Hayes's hand, at the vicious lies being spread by people who thought they could step on me just because of my bank account. I thought of Jessica sipping champagne while I was thrown on the street. I felt a new, unfamiliar fire ignite in my chest. Tell Madame Vivienne to get back in here, I said, my voice cold and steady. I need my armor. Madame Vivienne did not just create a dress. She forged a masterpiece. For the next 24 hours, the morning room of the Château de la Vierge was transformed into a chaotic war room of tulle silk and silver thread. When I finally stood in front of the towering antique mirror, my breath caught in my throat. The gown was an optical illusion of lion silk and hand-spun Calais lace, fitting me so perfectly it felt like a second skin. It wasn't overly bedazzled or desperately trying to scream wealth like the gowns at Maison de Geneviève. Instead, it radiated a quiet, devastating elegance. The silver lace cascaded down the bodice like morning frost, catching the light with every infinitesimal movement. I didn't look like a nurse who had won the lottery. I looked like I owned the world. Lady Beatrice stepped into the room, her sharp eyes scanning me from head to toe. For the first time since we met, she didn't look like she wanted to dissect me. She gave a single firm nod of approval. Acceptable, Beatrice declared, which from her was the equivalent of a standing ovation. She turned to Christian, who was staring at me as if he had forgotten how to breathe. Now, Christian, listen to me closely. We are not going to release a pathetic public statement begging the tabloids for mercy. Fiancés do not defend themselves. We dictate the truth. What are you proposing, Mother? Christian asked, finally tearing his eyes away from me. The Waldorf Astoria Autumn Gala is tomorrow night in New York. Beatrice said smoothly, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. It is the pinnacle of the social season. Every billionaire, every hedge fund manager, and every major media outlet will be there. Because of her newly minted status as the tragic victim of your supposed cruelty, Cassandra Belmont is the guest of honor. We're going to fly back to Manhattan. We are going to walk through the front doors of that gala, and we are going to burn her fabricated narrative to ash. 12 hours later, we were back in the sky crossing the Atlantic on the Vance private jet. The flight was a blur of nervous energy. Christian held my hand the entire time, his thumb tracing reassuring circles over my sapphire ring. He was terrified for me, worried that the media frenzy would break me. But looking at Beatrice, who was calmly sipping Earl Grey tea and reviewing financial dossiers, I felt a strange icy calm settle over me. I was done hiding. When the motorcade pulled up to the Waldorf Astoria, the noise was deafening. The street was barricaded, swarming with hundreds of paparazzi, flashing cameras and screaming reporters. Through the tinted windows of the SUV, I could see the red carpet. Standing right in the center, soaking up the camera flashes like a dying plant absorbing sunlight, was Cassandra Belmont. She was wearing a dramatic black gown looking appropriately somber, practically holding court with the reporters. And standing right beside her, acting as her loyal, newly adopted sidekick, was my former best friend Jessica. "Look at them!" Christian growled, his jaw ticking. "Like vultures. Let them feast for another 60 seconds, Beatrice said calmly. She looked at me. "Are you ready, Chloe?" "Yes," I said. Hayes opened the door. The moment Christian stepped out, the crowd went momentarily silent in sheer shock. The rogue billionaire had actually shown up. Then the silence shattered into absolute bedlam. Reporters screamed questions, demanding to know why he had ruined the Belmonts, why he was parading around his con artist fiancé. Christian ignored them all. He turned and offered me his hand. I stepped out of the SUV. The camera flashes strobed like lightning. I kept my chin high, my posture perfect, the Leon silk of Vivian's dress practically floating over the pavement. The crowd murmured. The narrative that I was a cheap, unhinged gold digger instantly clashed with the vision of absolute, untouchable, regal elegance standing before them. Flanked by Christian and Lady Beatrice with Hayes and the security detail, clearing a path, we walked directly up the red carpet. We didn't head for the doors. We headed straight for Cassandra and Jessica. Cassandra noticed us approaching, and the smug, victorious smile completely vanished from her face, replaced by a flash of genuine panic. Jessica physically shrank, trying to hide behind Cassandra's dramatic black train. The reporters sensed the blood in the water. The microphones were thrust toward us as we stopped just 3 feet from the 2 women who had tried to destroy my life. Christian Vance care to comment on the allegations," shouted a reporter from the New York Post. "Did this woman force you to shut down Maison de Geneviève Hugh?" Actually, Lady Beatrice's voice cut through the shouting. It wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that made the press corps instinctively fall silent. "My son did not shut down the boutique. I did." Cassandra's eyes widened. "That's a lie," she hissed, forgetting the cameras for a fraction of a second. "He bought the building and evicted Genevieve." "Yes, he purchased the building," Beatrice corrected smoothly, stepping forward to stand shoulder to shoulder with me. "But I ordered the liquidation. And do you want to know why, Miss Belmont? It was not because my future daughter-in-law threw a tantrum. It was because the Vance family does not tolerate unprovoked barbaric cruelty against our own. She is a liar and a manipulator, Cassandra shouted to the press, her voice shrill, trying to regain control of the narrative. She attacked the staff. He was a lunatic. Jessica. I spoke up for the first time. My voice was calm, clear, and carried directly into the cluster of microphones. I looked directly at the woman who had been my best friend since we were 12 years old. Is that true? Was I a lunatic? Jessica looked like she was going to be sick. She looked at the cameras, then at Cassandra, then at the terrifying united front of the Vance family. I mean, you were very emotional, Chloe, she stammered. Christian signaled Hayes with a subtle nod. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, Hayes announced loudly, holding up a sleek black tablet. AirDrop and Bluetooth files are being sent to all of your devices right now. I suggest you open them. A synchronized chorus of chimes and buzzes erupted from the phones and tablets of the 50-plus reporters surrounding us. What is this? Cassandra demanded, her voice shaking. That, Christian said, his voice cold and unforgiving, is the unedited 4K security footage from the VIP lounge and hallway of Maison de Geneviève, complete with crystal clear audio. I watched as the reporters tapped their screens. Gasps began to ripple through the crowd. They were watching the truth. They were watching Geneviève Dubois tell me my ring and I were cheap. They were watching Cassandra walk in, call me the help, and demand I be thrown out for simply looking at a dress. They saw the massive security guard violently grab my arm, leaving a visible bruise. And most damning of all, they saw the wide-angle shot of the lounge. They saw Jessica Carter sitting on the velvet sofa, actively turning her back and sipping champagne, while her best friend was physically dragged out the door crying. The silence that fell over the red carpet was absolute, followed immediately by a deafening roar of outrage directed entirely at Cassandra and Jessica. Miss Belmont care to explain why you called a pediatric nurse the help, a reporter screamed. Hochsichen. Jessica. Did your husband's hedge fund orchestrate this PR stunt to ruin the Vances? Another shouted. Cassandra's face was completely drained of color. Her carefully crafted victim persona had just been incinerated on live television. She tried to cover her face, pushing through the aggressive wall of reporters screaming for her publicist, entirely abandoning Jessica. Jessica stood frozen, the cameras clicking mercilessly in her face. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, real tears this time. Chloe, please. They offered me money for the interviews. My husband's fund is struggling. I had to. You didn't have to, I said softly, feeling a wave of pity for how hollow her life truly was. Goodbye, Jess. I turned my back on her. Christian wrapped his arm firmly around my waist, pulling me close. He looked at the cameras one last time. Chloe Jenkins is a woman who spends her life saving children in the oncology ward. She has more grace, more courage, and more worth in her little finger than the entirety of Manhattan High society. Christian declared, his voice echoing over the flashing bulbs. She is the future of the Vance family, and if anyone ever attempts to disparage her name again, I promise you losing a commercial lease will be the least of your concerns. With that, we turned and walked through the heavy gilded doors of the Waldorf Astoria, leaving the chaos behind us. Lady Beatrice walked beside me, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips. Well handled, my dear. I think you are going to fit in perfectly. The fallout over the next week was biblical. Cassandra Belmont was universally blacklisted. Her father's company, unable to secure any new loans due to the PR nightmare, was forced to sell off massive assets to stay afloat, quietly slipping out of the billionaire rankings. Jessica's husband filed for divorce after his remaining clients pulled their funds, disgusted by the viral video of her betrayal. Maison de Geneviève was gutted and turned into the headquarters for the new Vance Pediatric Foundation, with Clara, the young assistant, installed as a junior director, fully funded for her nursing degree. 6 months later, Christian and I were married. We didn't have the wedding in New York, and we didn't invite the press. We were married in the private, sun-drenched gardens of the Château de la Vierge. I wore Madame Vivienne's masterpiece. Beatrice actually shed a single elegant tear during the vows. And Christian, my sweet, devoted Christian, looked at me with the exact same love he had shown me in that run-down Brooklyn diner. As we danced under the Parisian stars, surrounded by a small circle of people who truly cared for us, I realized something. True wealth isn't found in bank accounts, armored SUVs, or silk dresses. It's found in the people who are willing to go to war for you, whether they are wielding a velvet checkbook or just offering a clean handkerchief when it starts to rain. What a journey. From crying on the freezing pavement of Fifth Avenue to wearing a custom Parisian gown and completely dismantling Manhattan's most toxic elite, Chloe proved that true grace always defeats manufactured status. Christian didn't just defend her honor, he showed the world that when you mess with the woman he loves, the consequences are absolute. And how incredibly satisfying was it to see Lady Beatrice, the terrifying mother-in-law, use her ruthless power to destroy Cassandra's lies on the red carpet. The security footage twist was pure karma in action. If you love this story of vengeance, devotion, and absolute justice, hit that like button. Share this with someone who loves a brilliant billionaire romance with a strong, unwavering heroine. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another jaw-dropping real-life drama. What was your favorite moment of the takedown? Let me know in the comments below.